Before I begin Chapter 9, I want to say thank you to everyone who has stuck with me so far through the previous 8 chapters of my first ever YouTube build series. For Chapter 9, I'm moving into a lot of the more large-scale construction of the body parts. For this chapter, I'm going to spend a lot of time here in the secondary hull. In this chapter, I'm going to insert and affix the shuttle bay into the secondary hull. We'll be doing that hopefully tomorrow night. Now at this point there is a cascading series and sequence of build activities that has to take place one after the other after the other. Before the shuttle bay can go into the secondary hull, I have to affix the clear windows to the paragraphic photo etch parts. I did a test run last night by affixing the clear window to the back of the officer's lounge. Going to talk about that a little bit. So have to make sure that all of my lighting that is in place, I'll do lighting tests and is working. The blue lights that are in the back for the tractor beam emitters, the LED strip lights that run down the sides for the windows, and the strobe light that is in the bottom that will go under the Arboretum. So after the Arboretum is in place, I will never be able to get to it, and that'll attach to the Tenant Controls control board because it is a blinking strobe light. So once the windows are in place, then I'll attach the top panel of the Arboretum that will go down into here. Once it is in place, then the shuttle bay will go in. The shuttle bay assembly into the secondary hull is one of the most complex pieces and parts of this build. I'm going to do it a little bit different than I did in the first build. Hopefully it'll run smooth. After the shuttle bay is in place with a minimal of cursing, then I will see about attaching the fan tail after I have the fan tail components in place, such as the masked and painted tractor beam emitters. Following that, I will, in Chapter 10, be moving on to attaching the Strongback portion, but before the Strongback can go in, the nacelle struts, the two-part nacelle struts go together before they can go together because the bottom portion of the nacelle struts are so close. All of the wires have to be put in place because it's impossible to feed wires through that connection once it's been made. So you have to make sure you know everything that's going to be in the nacelles, such as your chiller grill lights, your front end cap spotlights, the Tenant Controls strobe lights at the back. I haven't made up my mind yet whether I'm going to have amber lights in the back of the RCS thrusters, but all of that wiring has got to be in place before you attach the two parts of each of the two struts together. Then the struts go in, then the back goes in. Again, a cascading series and sequence of things that kind of culminates in a lot of the secondary hull going together. This is the material I used, polystyrene sheet, to make the windows that attach to the photo etch window pieces in the officer's lounge, and what I'm going to use very shortly for the windows in the Arboretum. It is clear and makes a good window. It is very temperamental. It will mar and scratch, and if you stress it in any way, try to press it into a place where it folds in even the slightest, it will turn white. So I probably went through about 6 or 8 different pieces before I came up with one that I thought went in well. What I did was use the stock Polar Lights stock piece as a template, laid it on one of the polystyrene sheets and carved it out with a hobby knife. Then it was still the slightest bit too large around the edges, and by trying to press the first one into place is how I discovered that with a little bit of stress that it'll get white streaks. So after each one that I cut, I went back with sharp kitchen shears and trimmed it ever so slightly so it would place down in that hole. I used Testors canopy glue. I applied the thinnest of little beads right here because I didn't want it to smear across the window. This is a really close fit, so I actually went back in with the Gorilla Grip wall putty to hold it into place. And so how does it look? I'm glad you asked. This is what the original stock window piece looks like that I used in the first build. This is looking through the polystyrene sheet into the officer's lounge through the Paragraphics photo etch part. As you can see, a lot is visible. There's a lot of detail. You can see the little figures, you can see the different rooms, you can see the furniture, the little end tables, and it's difficult to get a good focus, but there's the greenery off to the side, and then down the very forward part, there's a little sofa there, a little end table, little flight of stairs, this little guy. So the difference is striking and remarkable, and clearly it is worth all of the work to use the photo etch window pieces and the polystyrene sheet. It's a much better effect and a much better look. With the Arboretum top in place, held down by canopy glue, it's time to begin the sequence of events that will ultimately lead to the shuttle bay being affixed into the secondary hall. Again, the Arboretum has got to be put into place first, but before that can take place, I had said that I was going to try something a little bit different in terms of inserting the shuttle bay, a little bit different than I did last time. I had hoped that perhaps, and I think I had seen this in one or two builds, that I could maneuver the shuttle bay down into the secondary hull like this and get it into place with a little bit of maneuvering. I did a test fit earlier in the build and was successful in that, and I believe I'd seen in one or two YouTube build series that other builders had been able to do that, but in sort of eyeballing it yesterday, I saw that part of the problem is when the Arboretum is in place down here, it eats up a little bit of that maneuverability space. Also, with a lot of the different components inside here now, one of those little figures is beginning to get a little bit loose. I don't want to torque it around too much and have him come flying off and be rattling around inside of the shuttle bay. Also, when you've got a lot of your wires in place, it eats up a lot of your maneuverability room. So I'm going to roll back to the way I did it in the original build with a tip that I learned from both Matt's Model Shop and Boyd and Trekworks, is remove this pin right here, this support pin at the very front of the secondary hull. I'm going to take a Dremel saw bit, saw it off right here very carefully, set it aside, and then the shuttle bay can go in straight through here and edge up to the back. Also, in the very back of the secondary hull, there are these two locking pins that go underneath the shuttle bay here, two glue points. If you use those glue points and glue your shuttle bay there, and other builders have discovered this, then what you end up with, I'm just going to kind of simulate it, is a gap between the tail of the landing bay and the inside wall of your fantail. So, way to alleviate that is to saw off the very tops of these pins. You can leave the bases, and that'll actually give you a glue point to glue the support piece under the shuttle bay, but remove those pins and that'll give you a little bit more maneuverability. You're able to slide that shuttle bay back just a little bit far enough and take up that gap and save you some unnecessary puttying. So I'm going to first get started removing this support pin very carefully because it's actually going to go back in. I'll glue it back in after the shuttle bay's in and remove these, and then once that's done I'll get back and we'll insert the Arboretum. With the Dremel saw blade I have removed the glue point posts from the back of the secondary hull, as well as this support pin here, and always remember to use Starfleet Engineering approved respiratory masks and protective eyewear when you're using your power tools. This piece will go back in. I actually have a tip for how that can more solidly go back in when you glue it in place. This is a major support structure that attaches to the Strongback and helps bring this all together. Now I'm going to drop the Arboretum in place. One of the things that you'll notice is that the holes, the support holes for the Arboretum, are actually a little bit too small for the 3 different pins, and it won't push down into place. It's an easy fix. You just drill them out a little bit, but it's yet another case where you want to go, come on, Polar Lights, I mean really. But that's been done. I've put a little bit of canopy glue on these points. Actually, you probably don't even need to glue the Arboretum in place. This is one of those areas where gravity is your friend. There's not going to be a lot of forces to try to pull this thing up, particularly since you're going to have the shuttle bay resting on top of it. But might as well go ahead and put just a little bit of canopy glue, which I've done, on your pins so it can come forward. Make sure all wires are out of the way, and lock down into place. Again, the strobe light is tucked away under here, so now hopefully nothing will ever go wrong because it'll be damn near impossible to get to it, and certainly when that shuttle bay is in place. Before sliding the shuttle bay into place, I did one final lighting test on all of the lighting elements here in the secondary hull. The rear blue tractor beam emitters, the rear window lights, the main body window lights, and the strobe light in the bottom that will connect with the antenna control circuitry board. Made sure that everything fired up, everything worked, because when the shuttle bay goes into place, it will be damn near impossible to get in to fix these or replace these. I also very carefully moved wires aside, did a little bit of wire guiding with the Gorilla Grip putty to keep the wires out of the way. So a few tips, a few good practices I learned from last time. I have not glued this support piece in yet. That'll be a little bit more flexibility and perhaps being able to open the secondary hull up just a little bit. So as I try to maneuver the shuttle bay in place, I'm also not going to put in these light bars just yet to the top of the shuttle bay. That'll give me just a little bit more clearance here in this section here. This is a very tight area. So now let's all hope for the best and place the shuttle bay into the secondary hull. And as we can see here, it's a little bit tight right here in this space, which is why it's good to have that little tiny bit of flexibility. And then boom, that pretty much gets us in place with a minimum of trouble and no profanity. So now the shuttle bay is in place, and once it's fully set and once the fantail is ready, I will include the fantail. And as you can see right here, there is almost no gap between the rear of the shuttle bay and the fantail, which is fantastic. So you might be asking, but wait a minute, the damn thing's not glued in yet. So now that it is in place, what I do is come back under here and with a toothpick and some tester styrene glue will apply a little bit of glue on the bottom section where those pins were that I sheared off in that support area, because that can still work as a glue point. Also, I will go back in and do a little bead of hot glue right along this area here. There is a support post in the Strongback top, this post right here, that actually presses down on the shuttle bay to hold it in place. So with those elements, the two posts in the back, a little bit of hot glue there, and this in place, the shuttle bay really is not going to go anywhere. And I will work to get all of that secured and breathe a big sigh of relief. And then also, it's very easy at this point now to go back and to put these light bars in place. So the shuttle bay is in, glued. I've got a bead of hot glue right here to hold it, the forward portion, in place. I've glued these two support pins together, and now it's time to come in and repair or reattach this upright support pin. This is something that I came up with in my first build. I really love these cocktail toothpicks. Use them in a lot of applications for figure kits. The round end part is really great for making eyeballs if you ever do that. But what I discovered is they're the perfect size to fit into this hole, and then slide top piece back down into place, and it will help ensure more side to side support, and make sure that this joint right here will be a lot more firm, because this is going to be your upright piece when your Strongback top goes into place. I posted on one of the Facebook build forums, build groups, this tip when I first came up with it, and some troll said, oh well, that'll never work because the wood will degrade over time and completely go to pieces, and then it will lose its strength. I think that it would probably take several decades, if ever, for that wooden toothpick to degrade to the point that it would go away, and I still don't really believe that you would lose any support here. But it's a simple enough trick to go ahead and put in place. Now, I tried an attempt just to see how things were fitting together to just check the fit on the Strongback top ridge, and the good news is the rear portion lays down real well and connects real well. I think that I probably won't have some of the gap problems that I did in the first build, but it does not want to fully secure right here at the top. Now, I had read before other builders have problems with this piece, which I mentioned earlier in the chapter, that this is the piece that presses down on the shuttle bay and holds it in place. And other builders in some of those build forums and build groups have talked about how this piece is actually a little bit too long, and this forward section right here won't fully close. Didn't have a problem with that myself the first time, but lo and behold, I do now. So I'm going to get the handy Dremel saw bit. I'm going to shear off not much of this, maybe just a 1/4 inch, just as a first attempt to see if it will go down any better. I also discovered in attempting this fit that now the fantail doesn't quite want to seat as well as it should on the sides. It's not connecting very well. This is possibly due to the fact that the shuttle bay is a little bit further back than originally intended to make sure that we don't have that gap there. It may be due to the fact that there's just so much stuff crammed back in here that the side piece doesn't quite want to close up. It's just another example of this kit does want to fight you. What I may end up doing is to shear away this little locking pin here. I haven't quite made up my mind whether I'm going to do that yet. I'm going to still play around with the fantail and for the fantail fit. I think if this piece were gone and gone on the other side as well, then you'd have a snugger fit. But in the meantime, this has just got to be taken care of because this top piece won't lay down at all. Now, as I said, this is mostly just working on fit because the nacelle struts have to go into here prior to this piece going down. All of that locks in together, and it's a fairly ingenious way to make sure that the nacelles don't sag, a problem that has popped up in other Enterprise kits. But because of that, the nacelle struts have to go in, and remember in the second chapter I talked about how they have to be shaved a little bit, trimmed down a little bit to make sure all of this goes together. So right here I'm just trying to experiment with fit and to forecast and foresee any problems and take care of them. This entire secondary hull top piece is sort of legendary for creating problems, and you solve one problem and another one pops up. I can certainly attest for that. Yet again, an example of this kit fighting you. You have to make modifications to make some things work, and then as you make those modifications, other things don't work. And so there's a lot of problem solving involved with the secondary hull, but hopefully there are problems that are not insurmountable. So I'm going to trim this piece and see how it all comes together. I believe I said I was going to shear off about a 1/4 inch of that problematic top piece that pushes down on the shuttle bay to hold it in place. I actually ended up doing just a 1/16 of an inch. This is the piece that I sheared off with the Dremel, and I'm really happy to say, having done that, got a nice close fit. It fits down there very well, and I've kind of reached in there. I can tell that it's still making contact and putting a little bit of pressure on the top of the shuttle bay to hold it in place. But also, I'm happy to say that once that has been done, that I'm getting a better, not quite perfect, but better fit of the fantail. There's still a little bit of maneuvering to do, and I still might cut off that pin, and it actually fit better last time I checked it. But anyway, I think that that's going to be workable too, and sort of an unexpected happy outcome. A lot of this, once you go to glue it, is extremely difficult to clamp due to the different curved surfaces, and due to the fact that the pieces go together at an angle. It's really difficult to get clamps on a lot of these pieces to hold them in place. But that takes a little bit of engineering as well, to make sure that once you glue them that they are firm and snug. But for now, we've got a shuttle bay in place. The top will go down when it needs to, and so I'm going to declare a lot of the secondary hull engineering at this point to be a success. Now that we've utilized Starfleet engineering guidelines and standards to make structural modifications to the secondary hull to install the Arboretum and the shuttle bay, it's time to get back to fiddly stuff for some paint masks. I'm utilizing the HDA ModelWorks window and clear parts paint masks. These are nearly transparent blue vinyl thin masks that peel off, and you can see that I've peeled off some of them here, to apply to different areas for painting. And I have applied the mask for the impulse crystal, and I'm going to give this a coat of Tamiya fine white and then a fine coat of Tamiya haze gray. There are also the tractor beam emitters, which there's three tiny little hash marks, three tiny little horizontal bars that go here, because the majority of this is going to be the Tamiya haze gray. These will go here in the back of the fantail, which is the back portion of the secondary hull. I first used the HDA ModelWorks to do paint masks for the impulse grills, the impulse engine grills. I haven't taken them off yet. Now, there are also paint masks for after you install your Arboretum and officers' lounge windows, and I utilized the clear plastic sheets to make those windows. The idea is that you would place these paint masks, these HDA paint masks, over the windows so that you can do more painting and of course do your finishing, because if you apply any type of spray finish, whether it's semi-gloss or gloss, and it hits these windows and they're going to fog over. So you want to try to apply some type of paint mask. The problem here is that the plastic sheeting that's used for the windows is not quite flush with the interior of the hull, so there's a little bit of a gap. So these would actually lay down a little bit inside of the hull, and there's two problems with that. One is I'm afraid that there would be a little bit of bleed and some paint may end up getting on that window surface. The bigger issue that I'm afraid of is that in trying to reach back in there and pull them out, that I would mar them, or even worse, push that sheeting, dislodge that sheeting and push it in so that it would come loose and fall into the Arboretum or the officer's lounge. And if that were to happen, I just have no idea how I would be able to make that repair to get that sheeting out and replace it. And you can see also these are your window masks right here that go in here for your officer's lounge. And once again, the officer's lounge is a little bit more flush. Officer's lounge windows are a little bit more flush to the inside of the hull, but again, they lay down in direct contact with that window sheeting. So again, I'm afraid that maybe in trying to reach back in there when everything is done and peel them out, that I would dislodge those windows, which would be an enormous problem. And I'm not really sure how I would be able to overcome it. So what I'm going to do for a paint mask is the HDA Model Works set comes with these long strips. These strips are really the length, wrap around the entire saucer for doing your sensor bands. Well, I'm not going to need them because I'm going to use the Polar Lights Aztec decals to simulate the sensor bands. So I'm not going to use these paint masks because I'm not going to be painting those sensor bands. So I'm going to take these long strips, I'm going to cut them to length, and then lay them down in place across this window so that they're not actually touching the surface of the window, they're touching the surface of the hull, the photo etch piece actually, here and then again on that officer's lounge window. So I think it would be a lot easier to then peel that up once everything is done and it's time to reveal those. So now it's time to get started in painting some of these clear parts that I've applied the paint masks to. Here's the impulse crystal loosely taped into place at the back of the impulse engine housing, the rear of the top of the saucer. Pleased with the way it came out. Masked it with the HDA Model Works paint masks, gave it a coat of the Tamiya fine white primer, and then several coats of the Tamiya haze gray, and then 2 coats of Tamiya semi-gloss. Real pleased with the way it came out. I checked it to make sure there's no light leaks coming through any of these painted surfaces, and there's not. So I think this is really going to look great when it's backed by the Tenna Controls amber lighting. Now, one more bit of problem solving that I want to touch base on here in Chapter 9. So these are the impulse grills, which go on the back of the clear parts of the impulse engine. These are Paragraphics photo etch pieces that I cut out. So for a lot of the Paragraphics pieces, the smaller pieces, they're very light, and sometimes it's a little hard to hit them with a shot of any type of spray paint because they tend to want to blow around and flip over. Those little crew members have almost no weight at all, and if you're not careful, they're going to blow all over the place. So what I tend to do is do a double-backed piece of the blue painter's tape and lay objects just flat down on them to hit them with the paint. So raise your hand out there, anyone, if you can see what ended up happening. I lay these pieces down on the tape, hit them with a couple of coats of the Tamiya fine white primer, and of course what happened was, and I should have anticipated this but didn't, the paint filled in a lot of these grill spaces. So I had to very carefully with a hobby knife go through and scribe all of that paint back out, then took an extra firm toothbrush to brush it all away, and actually had to come in and straighten up a few of these grills. A few of these grills got a little bit bent, straighten it up with the hobby knife, and then really decided on this as the best way to try to hit them with a coat of paint. Very lightly affix the bottom portion to some plain blue painter's tape and gave them really just 2 of the lightest coats of the Tamiya fine white primer, and now I'm very happy with the way it came out. I think this is a great place to wrap up Chapter 9. Really got a lot done, considering that we've got the Arboretum and the shuttle bay in place, and did a little bit of window work and paint masking, and did one lighting test. Going to try to get a lot done in Chapter 10, including closing up the top of the secondary hull, take a look at those nacelle struts and what it takes to try to run wiring through those, and a few other things as well as we move further into the large scale hull assembly for the 350 refit. I'll see you in Chapter 10, Walker Street Shipyards.